A very warm welcome to everyone to our second webinar. I'm Mona Sashito, and I'm one of the board of directors of My Family Services. I'm just going to go over some of the housekeeping logistics. So all the participants, I request that you turn off your camera and mute yourself. So that way we can just see the panelists and the moderator on the screen. We'll also, you can send your questions through the chat box. If you, at the bottom of the screen, there is a menu. If you click on the chat, you can see the chat box and you can type the questions that the moderator, Lalita Ghosh, can take a look at it, and she can pose that question to the panelists. At the end of the webinar content, we are also going to open it up for question answer. You can unmute yourself at the time. You can turn on your camera as well, and you can ask the question if your question that you put in the chat box was not already covered. The recording of today's webinar will be posted on our Facebook page as well as on our website. Okay. Today's moderator is Lalita Ghosh. She has a degree in Masters in Social Work from University of Michigan, and she has Ann Arbor, and she has over 30 years experience in clinical social work. She has worked in nonprofit organizations, psychiatric hospitals, and currently works as on My Family Services staff as one of our social workers. And she also works for another private clinic. So I'm going to turn it over to Lalita. I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera. Okay, Lalita?
Okay, thank you, Mona. So this, I would like to introduce our three panelists who are, the first one is Dr. Rajerethinam, and he is a psychiatrist who obtained his medical degree in Madurai Medical College, Madurai, India. He was trained in psychiatry at Madras Medical College, India. He further trained at the University of Iowa and the University of Michigan in the US. He worked at Wayne State University, Detroit, Michigan, and at McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. He is in private practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dr. Raj has also authored a short textbook titled for Non-Psychiatrists. Panel member is Dr. Chandramouli, who is a forensic psychiatrist who also works in the community. The third panel member is Dronamraju, who is a volunteer caseworker at My Family Services and has been with the agency for 9 years. She assists MaiFS with case management, crisis intervention. She trains volunteers and also provides clinical training as needed to the community and staff. Sailaja has a master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan and has worked in the field of community health for 25 years. She is a health services supervisor at Washtenaw Community Mental Health and a therapist at Mindful Counseling in Ann Arbor. Her experience in the field of social work and mental health assists her in providing support and assistance to individuals who are victims of domestic violence. So to my panel, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No.
All right. So we have a list of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and ask the first of the questions on the list. This question is for Dr. Chandramouli. What are the most common mental health issues you come across in your practice, especially in relation to the COVID crisis?
I would say in the community, in our private practice, the patient population which we see is fairly representative of how mental illnesses manifests itself across populations. Namely, mood disorders and anxiety disorders are the most of our patients have anxiety or mood disorders. With more specifically, anxiety disorders would be generalized anxiety disorder or a post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder along those lines, or with mood disorder, more commonly the major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. And all of this worsened with um, uh, coexisting substance use, meaning addiction issues, which kind of complicates this presentation. Mainly, you also asked mainly with respect to COVID, I would say it's an ongoing process. So for the what I have noticed in the practice is that when patients have a condition, it tends to be exacerbated. That is what I have seen. If you have a mood disorder, that seems to have exacerbated. Anxiety disorder, exacerbated. In some conditions, there has been some patients who have claustrophobia, who have like agoraphobia, where they're scared of going out, staying indoors, are feeling a little comfortable about staying indoors, and all of that. But I think that's a transient thing that might change. So it is how it's going to affect long term, and as this crisis is also evolving. So once the lockdown opens, when people have to be out a little bit more, how is that going to affect it? So I think I would say I'm learning along with how this whole pandemic is panning out. But overall, whatever they have has been exacerbated. Substance use seems to be a big problem. That has exacerbated. If they have a lot of depression, that seems to have exacerbated. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
Is that all, Dr. Chandramouli, or
That's
would you like? Thank you so much. Dr. Raj, what are some of the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety?
Well, depression and anxiety as diseases are generally, characterized by the depressed mood. You can have a bad day here and there, and you call yourself feeling depressed, but it's sadness. But the sadness becomes a disease. That's depression. The same way, anxiety, the normal anxiety is necessary. A lot of times, if you're not anxious, you won't do well, right? Like if you're not anxious, you won't prepare for the exams and stuff. When that anxiety becomes pathological, meaning you have excessive anxiety that interferes with your day-to-day life, then it becomes a disease. So it's more or less the same as sadness for depression and fear or anxiety for the anxiety disorders, but the degree of which it is severe in the illnesses. Okay.
So are there any specific symptoms that people should be aware of that, that would kind of signal to them that they have?
Yeah, it's in mental health, pretty much everything is kind of longitudinal, meaning how long does it go on? Like for example, let's say if you have a little bit of knee pain, we wouldn't worry about that. But if the knee pain is severe and comes like every day and it lasts for a few months, then you worry about it. You can see that. Same way, if you have a bad day once in a while, that's okay. If you have a bad day every day and nothing pleases you, you cannot enjoy like these good day like we talked about. So there's no joy from life. And if it goes on, according to the criteria, I think you need to have the symptoms for 2 weeks. But usually, it has to be like a month or longer to have this consistent feeling of sadness that interferes with your day-to-day functioning. Then it becomes the disease. So specifically, it's not like a one bad day or like 2 bad days. It's like it's more or less like 1 or 2 bad weeks, and continuously every day you are feeling down, and that lasts for a month or so. Anxiety, on the other hand, is it's more like a lifelong thing. Anybody with the anxiety disorder can almost always trace their anxiety or nervousness way back to kindergarten. For example, the kids who have separation anxiety, that's children who don't feel comfortable going away from their moms. They tend to develop anxiety disorders more in the long run. So you cannot say one specific thing that makes the diagnosis. It's a number of things put together. If somebody suddenly feels anxious, they woke up and felt anxious, they never felt anxious, they were like the coolest people before, then you need to think about something else. Usually it's a kind of a lasting thing. So it's, on the one hand, it's difficult to diagnose mental illnesses because there is no diagnostic test. On the other hand, when somebody has it, it's almost everyone knows that there is something wrong. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
it's a tricky thing. Even at times, it's very difficult for us to decide. Quite often, I tell my colleagues who are not psychiatrists, and that's the way I wrote in the book also, is that when you're in doubt, it's better to treat, because what do you have to lose? Like, you go and see a therapist, you go sit and talk to someone, and then, if things don't get better, you can try your medication and stuff. These medications are pretty safe. The anxiety, depression medications are very, very safe. They're like more or less like Zantac, or like the allergen, the Claritin. Okay, so it's difficult to say that you're suffering, especially any symptom, any stress, even the COVID. If it affects to you, to a point that you are not able to function as well as you want to function, then it's a time to get help.
Okay, Dr. Raj, thank you. So the next question is also for you, Dr. Raj. How do stresses in life uniquely affect the South Asian community?
It's a good question, okay? It's a very good question. In fact, I'm going to be a little bit boring and long-winded. There was a study done in 1972. The long story short, the patients with schizophrenia seem to do better in India compared to other countries that were studied in that study, that include Russia, England, America, Nigeria, and a couple of other countries. But anyway, the reason they concluded was that the patients are mostly, they stay within the family. Okay, whereas in the Western countries and other countries, like they either are abandoned or they live in group homes and stuff. If you're within the family, there's always people there, right? So that helps at least to remind the patient to take the pills, or support the patient when the patient is not doing well. So that is a very important thing, which is study after study has shown that having this family support, like having so many friends, like, number of people you meet in a week is a predictor of better handling of stress. Okay. So that way, in some ways, we could say that we are gifted with tight families and close extended families. And if something happens to one person, everybody comes in. So that is a unique thing overall. But at the same time, what I've noticed, and I talked to you guys before, that when the Indians who come here and live here, when things are very different here, like, like you got to do everything on your own. So that also impacts stress in a little bit different way. So we don't know, when we are new, fresh off the boat, we don't know how to cope with the new lifestyle. You understand what I'm saying? Like, especially I've noticed quite a bit, and I've seen couples come to me for some reason or other, especially South Asian Indian couples. The biggest problem I've noticed is that, as a man, I'm embarrassed to say this, the men in the families do not seem to understand the role in keeping the home and adjusting to the new culture. Women seem to do well. or women seem to suffer more because they have no choice, they have to do it. Okay, so that's another unique aspect of our culture. In fact, do you all know the Japanese American clinic in UFM?
No, actually, I don't. But
Yeah,
I don't.
well, they I mean, I don't know. I mean, you people, some of you may have lived through the 90s in Michigan. There was a Japanese mom who committed suicide, I think,
Yes.
in Farmington Lewis. Okay, but anyways, so it's a similar situation. There's a cultural aspect to, especially Japanese cultural aspect, how they deal with stress. You know, I see that our culture uniquely with our family support, most of the times is very supportive. So we handle it better. Sometimes, you know, the family members could be intrusive, the family dynamics can come and play, but overall, I do think it's a good and bad. The good thing is we have support. The bad thing is that we need to adapt to a different culture. So these are the unique things that I've noticed. But I'm not a psychotherapist like Ronnie. Ronnie may have something to add.
Sailaja, would you like to add something to
Sure,
that?
sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Raj. Dr. Raj made some very, very valid points about how the importance of family and the family structure is to deal with mental illnesses and stress-related issues. One of the things that we observed with South Asians in general is that they come here and they are in a society where they have to face a multitude of differential dynamics, including socioeconomic dynamics, the need to compete and work in an atmosphere that is different from theirs. And as Dr. Raj said, when he said the men are not understanding, sometimes the men, in their defense and the defense of men, they have to face certain circumstances in their workplaces and in society where they're trying to compete with others, and they're trying to also protect and help their family. And this aspect of stress is because of immigration reasons, financial reasons, socioeconomic reasons, and also, yes, definitely the lack of the family structure. But the biggest thing that we're talking about is because of the fact that there might be underlying mental health issues, whether it starts off with some depression to major depression or other severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, where people do not want to seek support and get help for it. There are a lot of studies that talk about how, with South Asians especially, two major aspects play a big role in them not seeking help. One of them is mistrustful attitudes, because when they go to certain, areas, to medical facilities to get help, they find that, they may not be understood, or they think they may not be understood, or people will not understand the culture. So they do not trust the physicians or the prescribers and do not seek help. And the other part of it is the societal stigma. The societal stigma is a huge, huge aspect which keeps minorities from seeking the needed mental health care. And what the stigma, it's so potent because it affects the self-esteem of the people, and it's also the self-esteem of the family, because they might come from really well-to-do families in India, and here they're struggling, but they don't want to go out because they think that it's going to impact their family culture, their family lineage, and so many different things. And it's easier for me to come and say that I have cancer, then I'll get all the attention. But if I say I have schizophrenia or bipolar, people are going to shun me. I know a couple of people in the community who are from South Asia, and people don't really talk to them. There's a lady who's a widow and who has schizophrenia. People sometimes don't call her because she repeats the same things, and sometimes it's difficult to understand why she's behaving the way she's behaving. So she's pretty isolated, and so then we have to do outreach to make sure that she has that assistance. But stress in general, all the different things that go on in the society, and all the different things that go on within the families, and trying to balance the two cultures along with all the real stresses makes it really more complicated.
Thank you, Sailaja. So the next question is for you, Sailaja. How can they access the resources and help they need.
Absolutely. See, basically what happens is there are so many levels of resources, and people, there is sometimes a notion in our minds that there are not enough resources out there, but sometimes it is what we are looking for. Suppose I'm looking for somebody who's from a particular race, a particular culture, or particular language, then it may be difficult to find that particular person specialized in a particular area. However, there are so many different layers, and one of the, just to specify what happens in our society, in the North American society, they have a specialty mental health sector. In the specialty mental health sector, they have specialized agencies and programs at a national, state level, national level, county level, where they provide different types of treatment for people who are extremely mentally ill or severely mentally ill, and also provide services such as housing or other supports for them. Similarly, you know, if people have a smaller level of needs, suppose I'm feeling depressed for the past 1 week or 10 days, like Dr. Raj said, and I'm finding that my depression is not letting me function well, like meaning the depression is not letting me go to work, is not letting me cook my food, I'm getting angry at my kids and husband, I'm not able to talk to my friends. But those are all the indicators. If I am different from who I am, then it is it's time for me to call my doctor and start off with the PCP, the primary care physician, and say, hey, I'm feeling this way. What is it? Is it because my sodium levels are low, because I'm having a fever? You know, so the doctor can help you. So going to the general medical care or the PCP sector, sometimes if you, one of the biggest hindrances for people is the insurance and the deductibles and co-pays. People don't want to go to the doctor because they don't want to pay the deductibles. So there are certain options even for that. There's a health savings account that people can have to save up some money to go to see the doctors. But there are community agencies, there are community health clinics which give subsidized or, you know, sliding scale for therapy and for counseling and also to see the doctors. Similarly, there's a human services sector where, you know, if people lose their jobs, are laid off, don't have the money, then they can go to the social welfare, the public service agencies that would provide them with all the support that they would need to get the help they need. And of course, there are wonderful agencies like My Family Services that are the volunteer network or the voluntary network that do different things to assist people, to reach out to people. And if, you know, we don't have a particular service, then of course we will connect them with different people who can provide the service. But the most important aspect of it is to reach out. And once they reach out, even if the person does not belong to our race or our culture, and there's some people who think they will not understand, then they will find resources. I have had people from University of Michigan or from other places, St. Joe's, doctors call me because they're looking for an Indian therapist or they're looking for somebody who understands the Indian culture. And, you know, if I cannot find someone, I can always find somebody else. So there is a network system. There are resources outside, but the biggest thing is the intention of the person to access the resources. And it may not be in plenty, like, you know, many things are not in plenty in the society. We might always look for more and more resources because the need is really high and people are hiding it sometimes, but the need is very high. And there are ways in which we can connect them to the different resources. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes, that was very informative. So the next question is for both Dr. Chandramouli and Sailaja. And so Dr. Chandramouli, you can go first. How can we reduce or eradicate the stigma of mental illness among South Asians?
Yeah. And even as this webinar is going, I think we are hearing a lot of barriers to care, and stigma seems to be one of the major barriers to care. So first of all, I think that there has to be a conscious effort to reduce stigma. People have to, and it has to be a collective approach, but at the same time, we can only change ourselves. So the change has to come from within. The drive to help reduce stigma associated with mental health, as identifying that mental health is so crucial to well-being. that, I mean, how much importance do we place to physical health? And first of all, acknowledging that mental health is as important as that. So, and in order to preserve one's mental health and the well-being of their near and dear ones, and then the circle gets bigger and bigger. But I think it has to start from the person itself. So what needs to happen? So it has to be a multi-pronged approach, but from the personal, like with just people attending here, what can they do? What can an individual do? I would say overall, the main thing would be to kind of educate yourself about what is mental health, what is good mental health, what are signs of mental illness. So these are things which we are actually addressing through this webinar. So educating yourself, read up about it, ask questions, be more familiar with what common mental health symptoms are and what to watch out for. And like Sailaja mentioned, starting with discussing any concerns with your PCP and your pediatrician if any concerns arise and you want to, in the process of educating yourself about what, if you have any specific questions in mind. But also at home, I think people have to make this conscious effort to have an open communication where we are really asking how the other person is doing rather than just doing it for formality. How are you? And I'm fine has become more of a formality rather than like really asking that question and waiting for that person to open up and having that open communication within the family so that it opens the, because people who have mental illness are possibly, because of the social structure, going to have a lot of hesitation to come up and speak up about what they are experiencing. So to enable that, to facilitate that, it is important that we open up doors and have an open communication. And even nobody needs to have a mental health issue before this is discussed. None of us wait for a heart attack before we start exercising. So preventative measures are very important. And once you start having these discussions about what contributes towards good mental health, how sleep is very important, how good social bonds are very important. Having meaningful conversations of this nature, how exercise and yoga and all of this not only helps you with your physical health, but also improves your mental health, opens up that door that, we are considering one's mental health issues, one's mental health well-being of one's mental health. So I think that is where one can start within your house, for yourself, educate yourself, ask questions, and explore more. And the people are also asking there was a question which came up, how to deal with patients with mental health issues. Remember, if you're in this community, you are possibly communicating and interacting with many people who have mental illness. So they are not very different from you and me, or, I mean, how do you know I don't have a mental health problem? So people are people. So you're just going to treat them as any other person. You're not going to treat them any differently. You might experience an autistic person or a person with low IQ or somebody who has severe schizophrenia, psychosis, where it is harder to communicate with them. In those circumstances, I would say you have to have plenty of empathy, not having a non-judgmental attitude, and just being compassionate. That is more than enough to just for you to interact and have just to make sure that you don't offend that other person, and also just not make the situation very awkward. But overall, I can tell you that most of, like, if you are asking me this question, you already know the answer, because you're just going to treat them as any other person. So that is not very different. So I think stigma, coming back to stigma, I think the issue is kind of educating oneself, and within the family, having a little open communication. And it's very important for kids, because you will learn a lot from the kids. We have come here from elsewhere, but our kids have grown up here. So there's a lot of, so we are talking about a lot of culture, I mean, kind of blending into this culture as one of the stressors. So I think opening that door and hearing different viewpoints, that is what will help us understand and get past these barriers to mental health.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sailaja?
Those are very good points, Dr. Chandramouli. And, basically what I would like to add to that is that one of the biggest reasons why we have the stigma and we have the concern is, in general, there is this thought that if somebody has a mental illness, that they are dangerous people and they are scary to be with. If somebody has schizophrenia, they would think they're very scary. When I mentioned to somebody that Dr. Tori, who wrote 10 books and who's the head of the department of UCLA psychiatry, has schizophrenia, they said, oh my God, really? I said, yes. So schizophrenia is not scary, but the thought that people have that certain diseases are scary because they have, especially mental illnesses. Mental illnesses are not scary, but when a person is like put in a corner and not subjugated to certain, I think, unjust treatment, as we saw in the recent media, then people are going to act out in different ways and behave in different ways. So that is one of the reasons where the stigma starts off and the hatred and the prejudice starts off. The other part for South Asians especially is the biggest thing of the family lineage and the harsh socioeconomic impositions on a person, like, don't tell anybody you have mental illness because your sister can't get married, or your brother cannot get married, or certain other issues that would impact the financial aspect of the family, the lineage of your family. Your grandfather was so great, you cannot do that. So certain impositions that are put on people's minds cause that stigma, which it really kind of cramps a person's need to go get help. It also, people are concerned about economic prospects. People don't want to talk about certain things because they feel they won't get a certain job, or they will not, their business is not going to grow. So there have been people who have mentioned examples where they applied for a job and mentioned they have schizophrenia, and they were totally banned from there because though they were people with PhDs and who were extremely intelligent and could do their job very well. The biggest aspect of this stigma is for each one to be accountable for their own self. Take a second tonight before you go to bed and ask yourself about your own prejudices, because each one of us has prejudices. We might say so many beautiful things, but when it comes to sitting down with a person who has mental illness or accepting that we have a mental illness, we might be the last person to do it. And it is difficult. It is very difficult for educated people to sit in front of somebody and say, hey, I have schizophrenia, depression. Unless you're Deepika Padukone. I mean, now that Deepika Padukone has come out and started her organization, I see that she has really influenced a lot of the younger generation. I would say that 80 to 90% of my clients are younger people who are studying and who know they have depression and will call me and say, I need help. My mom and dad don't want me to get help, but I want to get help. So they are some of the conversations I have with people. And so basically, one of the biggest things to reduce or eradicate stigma, along with what Dr. Chandramouli said, is for each one of us to be accountable for our own self and eradicate our own stigma towards this. And I think one of us can light a light, and then it might spread to the world around us.
And to add to that, Rani, very well said. So the one thing I would add to that is that the longer you take before you seek care, the lesser your outcome is going to be poorer. Just like any other illness, if you let high blood pressure run its course for a while before you start taking any steps towards controlling it, it's going to get harder to do. So if your intention is for them to be be seen as somebody who is impaired and you're trying to hide this whole thing under the rug, that will anyways manifest if nothing is done about it. So just to looking at your playing along with the social values and how things can be implicated, the sooner you get care, better chances of you having a good quality life. So I think even more reason why you should be more proactive about seeking care.
And may I just make one comment, Lalita? One other thing was for South Asians is we are very religious people. We love God and we pray to God. And sometimes we just think that, okay, my son is depressed, so if he prays to God, he will be fine. And there have been many young people who were sexually abused or traumatized in families, and their families told them, don't tell anybody, just pray to God and you'll be all right. Yes, God does help. I believe in God and I trust God 100%. But when there's certain emotional issues, certain chemical imbalances in the brain which cause these issues, the biggest thing is to get help, because the doctors know and the prescribers like we have here are extremely wonderful, who can help and diagnose and help them to get rid of some of those symptoms.
Okay, thank you so much, Sailaja and Dr. Chandramouli. Sailaja, the next question is for you. Is there an impact of mental health on domestic violence?
You know, there is a lot of research, Lalita, that talks about the impact of domestic violence on mental health. There's a lot of research that says that when survivors of domestic violence deal with depression and other illnesses, including bipolar, because of the impact of the violence in their life, there is very little research in the area of the opposite. That is, you know, are the perpetrators of violence people dealing with mental illness? And there, yes, in many cases, it is shown that the perpetrators, the batterers, are people who themselves have mental health issues. Sometimes it is because of the stresses in the community. Sometimes it's because of their own chemical imbalances. And all those together make them be in a place where they cannot express themselves. And then they use violence as a way to hurt others. And it's not that mental illness causes violence, but because of the mental illness, they are in a place where they express themselves with violence. And many of the situations are also connected with substance abuse. So when they're mentally ill, they're depressed, they have schizophrenia, other illnesses, they try to use alcohol and other substances to kind of lessen their symptoms. And when they use alcohol, their thought processes and their actions are totally different. And then they become individuals who resort to violence on the individuals around them.
Okay, thank you, Sailaja. So next question is for Dr. Chandramouli. Dr. Chandramouli, do you have any suggestions for good mental health and well-being?
I think I kind of touched upon a few of those before, but at the same time, I think the common ones which people should be aware of is that improving your general physical health. So good diet, health, exercise, especially aerobic exercise, and some deep exercises which involve deep breathing, like yoga, Tai Chi, and can also help with overall anxiety symptoms. And I would say, and good sleep hygiene. So we might have to talk a little bit more in detail about that.
Yes, that's our next question.
Okay. So good sleep hygiene and keeping away from any mood-altering substance, you know, alcohol and recreational use of drugs. I mean, completely refraining from all of them would be a starting point. But I think above and beyond, there are certain things which is not talked about much. But I just thought I will touch upon them as points to consider. I think we have to work on developing good social bonds in our lives, not just people whom we have relationships where we are partying together and having a good time, watching movies together, but actually being involved in the community. Like Dr. Raj had mentioned, how we talk about strong bonds within, like, building your social currency, which goes a long way in improving, and outcomes for mentally ill people in India, as he mentioned. So we have to work on those social bonds. Having a few friends whom you can have a good time with is very different from whom you can feel comfortable calling for help when hell is breaking loose at home. So I think stigma will come in the way. So I think even before all of that, we need to work on developing those really strong bonds within our community. And how can you do that? Before you expect that from others, it has to start from within, where you are there for your friends, you're there for your family, you are there for your colleagues at work. When you ask them how they are doing, really mean it and be there for them. Listen and develop those bonds. If somebody is having a rough day, be kind to them rather than gossip about what's going on. Those, I mean, build those meaningful relationships. If somebody is going through a difficult time, call them, ask them if there is anything they can do. Don't be intrusive. Don't try to know what exactly is going on, but just show that you are there for them. So I'm kind of segueing into what I'm trying to say is having those bonds where, somebody trusts that, if I'm having a bad day, I can call this person and talk to them. So you need to be that person. That is the only way the other person is going to be there for you too. So you need to start working from your end about building these strong social bonds, which overall and not with the expectation that they will be there for you, but overall to kind of being empathic and being compassionate towards others is going to have a positive effect on your mental health. So you did, without expecting them to reciprocate, do it, because just the act of giving, act of showing love is going to have a therapeutic effect for you. So I would start off there and then identify purpose in life. What do you really want to? There is something you have to contribute to community. What would that be? Something beyond beyond your duties for your family and your children and all of that. Identify what is that purpose, and that purpose has to be not to get some social status, not to satisfy one's own ego, but for inner peace. So what would that be? So those kinds of activities will help you gain some motivation to wake up every day and do something. It'll give meaning to your life. And your kids, and making sure I send them to college cannot be the only motivation. They will go to college and then what? So identify things which will overall make or give you purpose in life. And that way, and you have to do that without expecting favors or something in return. So those are things which will overall help in kind of, and this might be more along the lines of spiritual development, but that will help you. So but apart from that, like we already touched upon, like, good sleep hygiene and spend time in nature. If you're exercising, rather than doing it on a treadmill, if you can spend a little bit more time with nature, all of that has healing powers. These were things which we were doing without our knowledge 50, 60 years ago. This was happening naturally. So now we are having to discuss about that and kind of bring back all of these into incorporating it into our life in order to ensure good mental health. So,
okay, thank you very much. That was very enlightening. So, Dr. Raj, the next question is for you. How important is sleep in relation to mental health?
Sorry, I was talking with mute on. Sleep is, in my opinion, the single most important factor in any mental illness. Meaning, it's a sign of mental illness, as well as it's by not sleeping well, you can make this mental illness worse. And when the mental illness gets worse, your sleep is the first one gets affected. And people who don't sleep on a regular basis tend to develop mental illnesses in the long run. So it's very intricately connected. In other words, we need to consider sleep as essentially something to reboot your brain. Our physiology is built around the need for 8 hours sleep. 8 hours sleep. Without that, if you don't sleep, if any one of us doesn't sleep for 3 days, 72 hours, we can all start hearing voices. Okay, so it's a very important thing. So the sleep hygiene Dr. Chandramouli mentioned earlier, it has several points. Anybody can Google sleep hygiene. There are some PDFs online from University of Maryland, Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. Basically, there are about 7 to 10 points to remember for all of us, not just patients suffering from mental illness. In fact, I'm sorry. I was way back when I was an intern. I was sitting in my first day in Oakwood family practice clinic, and I was sitting in the waiting room where all the patients sit and was waiting to meet the doctor. So I saw this pamphlet, Sleep Hygiene, about 10 different points to improve your sleep. And believe it or not, it's just basically you train your body. Since I read that, and I maintain very good sleep discipline, and you get used to it. It's another habit, like brushing your teeth. So some of the most important points are like no coffee after like afternoon, evenings. Okay, no stimulants, no drugs, no excessive amount of alcohol. Always sleep on time and always wake up on time. Try not to take naps unless that's kind of your routine. Like people in India, they make like 2 hours in the afternoon for a nap, and that's every day. So the regular schedule is very, very important. So I mean, I would recommend all of you to just Google sleep hygiene and then just at least read it once so that you remember, you know, this, we all make those same mistakes over and over and over. Okay. So you don't sleep well, then you drink a lot of coffee, and then, you know, it forms a cycle. Okay. So sleep hygiene is very, very important. It's the single most important thing for any mental health issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that concludes questions. So now we're going to move to, does anybody have anything to add to any of the questions that have been asked? Okay, let's move to the questions from our audience then. So this question was, answered by definitely, while we've been having this discussion. One of our viewers has asked, if you know someone who has mental anxiety or depression related issues, how do you effectively guide them to seek help? Any one of you can take that question.
You should answer.
Basically, the thing is, when you have a question about anybody's mental health and go approach them and say, I think you are having some mental health issues, let's go to the doctor, they're going to get angry with you and they would have an issue with that. But basically, one of the best ways to do it is help them identify and say, what is happening? How can we help you? Because sometimes we want to help people and we tell them, why don't you do this? And they don't want to listen. But rather than say it that way, say, how can we help you? Because there's something that's going on that is not you. There's something that's going on that's not helpful. And sometimes giving them books, like there are some books written, like Dr. Raj has written a book, and there's so many others who have written books that, with essays like Surviving Schizophrenia is one of them by Dr. Turi. Similarly, there's so many books, and we can always create a list of books. So give them a book to read so they understand that something is not going right. And sometimes when they have severe mental health issues, like they have severe schizophrenia, they have delusions and paranoia, they cannot identify that they have a problem. So they're constantly in that denial phase, or sometimes they create a false reality in their mind. And when they create a false reality, it becomes more difficult for the family. If the family is struggling with issues related to mental health or with substance abuse, they can approach the mental health professionals. They can approach the doctors. They can approach the primary care physician and say, this is happening, how can we get help? There are different ways in which we can assist the families access and also get the support they need. It will be a little difficult. You have to be prepared for that, but definitely it can be facilitated.
The one I just wanted to add that I think the question was more specific for people with depression and anxiety related problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've touched upon that initially, Sailaja.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. So there is going to be more resistance if you tell them that it looks like you need to see a psychiatrist. So that might not fly too well with somebody. So I think the main thing would be to kind of be more empathic and have an open conversation and try and hear them out. And once you hear them out, and if you are familiarizing yourself with few of the symptoms of depression and anxiety, it might be a way to tell them that you can just tell them that I have read. I've attended this webinar, I have attended this where they kind of hinted that these might be something that people can get help with through therapy and things like that. Or the other way to do that would be there are many medical conditions which can mimic psychiatric conditions. Why don't we just check with your PCP? Why don't we just, like thyroid issues can present as depression and anxiety. There's so many hormonal issues which can happen. And people might be a little bit more willing to talk about it with the PCP rather than directly going and seeing a counselor or going to the therapist or to a psychiatrist. So I think kind of nudging them into kind of getting some kind of help, and then kind of and then from one of the experts, they can hear what the recommendations would be, and that way you have just nudged the path and kind of led them towards seeking care.
Okay, thank you. So the next question that somebody asked is specifically for you, Dr. Raj. Is somebody asked if one can get dependent on these medications, and are there any side effects?
I'm sorry, I have a loud dog behind me. So I did answer the treatment in general. The antidepressants are treatments for depression and anxiety. Most of the newer antidepressants, including things like Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, and Celexa, you might have heard of, they are pretty safe medications and they don't have like major side effects. May have some difficulty, but usually they are very safe medications, easy to take. And when the patient responds, they respond very well. You know, a lot of times these drugs can be life-changing. Okay, so they are not addictive. However, things like Xanax, Valium, Ativan, clonazepam, these are benzodiazepines that have an immediate effect on anxiety. They're essentially alcohol-like. So they are very highly addictive. I don't prescribe any of them to anyone. So it's tricky. You know, that kind of gives the stigma among people that all psychiatric drugs will make you look sedated and very highly addictive. Once you get on it, you cannot get off of it. That's all not true. There are some medications that are very highly addictive, like we all know that Vicodin is addictive, but not Tylenol. The same way antibiotics are not addictive. Okay. The same way the antidepressants are not addictive. Antidepressants, antipsychotics are not addictive medications. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
One more thing, sorry.
Oh,
Just because you need to
go
take
ahead.
medication, am I on mute still? No. Now, some patients argue saying that, like, I have to take this medication, otherwise I'm not going to feel good. Just because you need to take medication doesn't mean that you're addicted or even dependent. We need something, we need something. Let's say if I'm diabetic, I need insulin. Simple as that. Okay.
So, Dr. Raj, could you also address the issue of compliance?
Compliance, well, even cancer patients have the compliance of about 85%. Okay. And especially in mental health and patients who sometimes do not believe that they have the sickness, they need medications, they don't take it. It's a big problem. Compliance is a huge problem. Patients sometimes, even when they know that it helps them, we all feel uncomfortable that we need to take a pill. Like 30 years ago when I was first diagnosed with hypothyroidism, on the one hand, I felt relieved that, oh my God, all these symptoms are from the thyroid and I can take a pill and I'm going to be all right. On the other hand, it was depressing to me that I had to take a pill for the rest of my life. Okay. So it's a tough thing. It's like, we need to talk to patients about the cost benefit. Any healthcare decision, whether even like clipping your nails or whatever, is based on the cost benefit. We try to take a medication because if you don't take the medication, the cost could be death or suffering. So I'm a big believer in knowledge. If people know and understand fully well what is in it for them, if they take the medication, what are the benefits, what are the problems, they generally become more compliant. But
absolutely. So yeah, as long as we continue working on improving insight, like Dr. Raj said, as you keep working on improving one's insight, compliance tends to get better.
Absolutely. And one thing, Lalita, I've also noticed is when people take medications and they start feeling good, then they feel, okay, I'm feeling good, I can stop taking my medication. Because even with antibiotics, sometimes if you have to take it for 5 days, Citromax, on the third day you're feeling good, so you stop taking it. So that is another pattern that we've noticed with many people who deal with mental health illnesses, because they think, oh, I'm doing good, so I don't need the meds, and then they crash again, and again you get that.
Thank you. So the next question is from another audience member. I think most people do not know how to interact with people suffering from mental illness. Any advice to us as to how we can interact with them?
I think I already touched upon that.
Yes, you did.
So if anybody else wants to add something.
Just a lot of understanding and kindness. And sometimes when we think it's the person who we're not able to communicate with, but it's our own prejudices that comes in the way. When I'm not interacting well with somebody, it's not them who's the problem, it's me who's the problem, because I'm thinking there's something else. And so basically, if we first, once again, examine our own approach to certain things and understand, oh, she's not the problem, it's me thinking she's a problem. And one of the other aspects of it is to remove the stigma that we have and try to interact with them in a way like you would normally do. A concept that's used a lot in the field of mental health in the community area is person-centered planning and self-determination. So sometimes when they see a person who has mental illness, people start talking loudly. So they have a mental illness, but they're not deaf. And so we have to, and if they have people, yeah, if the people have autism, like, yes, this person is autism, but they're not deaf. You don't have to talk loudly. Be kind to them and treat them like a human being. And one thing I found that once you trust a person, you value a person and treat them like you would treat anybody else, they are beautiful people. I have learned a lot of lessons from people around me who've dealt with mental illnesses or even intellectual disabilities. They have taught me more lessons than even somebody with PhD or, more experience. So they are beautiful people. So to enjoy them, it would be really good. And Lalita, I also wanted to address, one of the comments was about the movies and how the movies have a
Yes. Mm-hmm.
See, the thing is Bollywood, and sometimes the directors or the producers, whoever are doing it, do the research before creating the movie. There are a lot of newer movies with better, real aspects roll into the movies. There's some movies where they might misunderstand the concept of mental illness. I still cannot understand Khamoshi, one of the older movies, like, what is that? I mean, what diagnosis was that? And, so it's like they just create their own stories. So Bollywood is Bollywood, and it's for us to enjoy and not create, understanding of mental illness based on what we see in movies. They just create stories to help us catharsize our emotions and our feelings that we've hidden inside about certain issues that we want to get out. So that's my observation. Thank you for the idea.
Thank you. So the next question is, what do we do with people who don't accept that they have depression and don't want to get any professional help, but suffer through the disease and make their families suffer as well? What's the best way to trigger that self-realization in those individuals? Dr. Chandramouli, I think you touched on some of that. Is there anything more you would like to add?
Again, I think the main thing would be to nudge them towards that first step towards care. And then an expert can take over and talk to them a little bit more. So to expect a lot of expertise from every family member to know exactly how to segue through this is going to be hard. So I think getting them to that first point of contact is what you need to work on. So if that first point of contact is going to be like, if it's somebody at the school, if it's a child, then if it's going to be the school counselor, then that's going to be the person. If it's going to be a pediatrician, then that's primary care doctor, then that would be. If you have somebody in your family circle whom they trust more and whom they might listen to better, then that person can be what do they trust? Who could that person be? Can it be the priest in the temple? Anybody. Like, those are social resources you want to use to your benefit, to kind of So I think that is where it starts. Figure out whose words mean the most to them.
Mhm.
See if we can get them on board and kind of help them through that.
Sure.
But I think overall, not antagonizing and kind of being patient and hearing them out and giving them a little bit of time rather than get frustrated with them. Because once they get frustrated with you, they are burning another bridge. There is this one person, you, who's trying to get them help. And if that bridge is burned, then they're more likely I mean, I don't know how many compassionate people who have their real good interest is out there. So you don't want to contribute towards you being burnt out during this process.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just
Okay.
be there for them. If they don't want to get the help, as long as they are not a danger to themselves or others, just be there for them. That's going to make a difference. You might not notice that immediately, but that's what happens.
That is so beautiful, Chandramouli. And Lalita, I just wanted to also mention that NAMI, the National Alliance for Mentally Ill, has online, they have a website, and they also have online groups and online support groups. So sometimes as family members, if we need support to deal with a person in our family who is dealing with a mental illness, then please do access those, because there's online Al-Anon groups. If you have an alcoholic in your family, go to the Al-Anon group online. If you have a stigma to go to a real group, you can go, and of course now everything is online, but go to the online groups because they are so helpful. They give direction, they give resources. And okay, I mean, there are people, many individuals who are also South Asians there now, but they know how to connect with us. They know how to connect with the people who can support. But this is really something that they can access and get help for themselves to deal with it.
Okay, thank you, Sailaja. Dr. Raj, is there anything you would like to add?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, not particularly. If anybody has any specific questions for me, I'll be happy to answer.
Because there were two, I don't know if everyone has access to the chat, because one of the responses you had to that was ask them to read about depression, where there are many self-rating scales they can use.
Well, somebody said, like, what if somebody doesn't want to get help for depression?
Right.
Again, that's the same as I mentioned before. Just education helps. Understanding that this is an illness that is amenable for medication helps a lot compared to, it's not exactly a weakness in personality or weakness in morality or anything like that. So people, it helps them to understand that it's not exactly something they are doing. It's not in their control. Yeah. Knowledge is power. Yeah.
So we have another question here, and one of our audience asked, is ADD considered a mental health issue?
Well, if I can answer, ADHD is a tricky diagnosis. One second, I'm looking for an article link. So some people in the community, the psychologists, think that ADHD is not a true disease. I am not, I don't subscribe to that belief, but at the same time, I'm fairly certain that it is overdiagnosed. To give you some example, about 20% of young adults are taking treatment for ADHD. However, the population prevalence is considered 1%. So 19 out of 20 people who are taking the medication with the diagnosis of ADHD do not have ADHD. That means if a patient comes to me into my office claiming that they have ADHD and they need a prescription for Ritalin, 95% of the time I can say, if I say that without even seeing the patient, if I say that, no, you don't have ADHD, I have a 95% chance of being right. That makes sense? Okay, so it's overdiagnosed. It's the drugs treated for ADHD are highly addictive, controlled substances, meaning they are similar to methamphetamine. It's like opium, and then the Vicodin is derivative of opium. The amphetamine, methamphetamine, Ritalin, they all are the same molecules. Okay, So they are stimulants. They don't treat the disease. They make you focus better. If any one of us takes the ADHD medication, we'll all be doing things better. I will be more eloquent and I'll get more things accomplished, but at the same time, it doesn't mean it's a disease. So it's a very difficult topic in the sense that the disease itself cannot be proven. The treatment itself may not be a treatment. It could be a lifestyle thing. Like we all drink coffee to improve our concentration. The same thing happens with the Ritalin. So I do not treat ADHD. If anybody calls my clinic and says that they have ADHD, I tell them to go somewhere else, because most of the patients who take the ADHD don't have ADHD, but they are very attached to the medication. So unlike you go to the doctor says that, oh, you don't have blood pressure anymore, or you don't have cancer anymore, you don't need to take the medication anymore, you'll be happy. But you tell an ADD person, you don't have to take the medication anymore, they say that they will sue you. I need that medication. I need to take that medication. So it's a very difficult thing. It's a topic I don't want to be dealing with, because I think the disease and its treatment are very, very highly abused, particularly in this country. I mean, we generally use more narcotics than any other country, and I would think twice, 3 times before I treat any of my own family members. Every one of us have been accused of having ADD, but no, I wouldn't recommend taking those stimulants, anyone. And that stimulant at a higher dose, if 80 milligrams of Ritalin, will cause psychosis for every one of us. So it's not a safe drug. It's a very dangerous drug. So I have a very strong bias against the diagnosis and treatment of ADD. And I sent another link that's all about how ADHD diagnosis is being misused or overused.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chandramouli, is there something you would like to add to that?
No, I think Dr. Raj was eloquent enough. I don't think he can get more eloquent with stimulants, so I don't think he needs to.
I would like.
So I think that, under the particular situation that we're in with the pandemic, this last question is sort of very appropriate for this time. And, anyone can take it on and answer it. So once the stay-at-home order is lifted, do you expect the anxiety levels amongst the general population to go up? Could it lead to more mental health disturbances in people, including children?
Again, we are physicians. I'll let him.
Go ahead.
Again, we are physicians. We go by science. We go by data. We don't go by prediction. But overall, that can be anticipated, where some of the anxiety symptoms are probably under the radar currently, because anxiety disorder patients tend to like to isolate themselves, tend to not socialize, and so these are and they might be germophobic. So these are things which are kind of validating those fears. So, but those fears to begin with were unrealistic fears. So now there is a real situation where the world is socially isolating and doing things. The fear is whether we are going to validate those unrealistic fears because now they feel like, yes, see, this is what I was worried about all this while. So that is possible, where people who have the illness might have more flare-up of those symptoms because they have felt a little validated, and those false fixed beliefs that they have about the world being an unsafe place has kind of been strengthened. Those thoughts have gotten some validation. And at the same time, soon after the lockdown is lifted, there is going to be a lot of speculation about whether it's really safe to be out there. Are we, can I do this? Can I do that? So wherever there is uncertainty, wherever there is unpredictability about the future, that is just the nature of anxiety. It's fear of the unknown. So, and realistically, there is going to be that, the uncertainty is going to be there for a little bit, at least up until we find a vaccine or a way to kind of this illness kind of disappears in some shape or form. So that would be expected. I would imagine anxiety disorders would go up. Flare-ups of anxiety might get worse when the social distancing and stay-at-home orders get lifted. That is very much possible. But for now, I am not saying at the clinic. What I'm seeing is more flare-ups. What we are seeing is more flare-ups of whatever they're dealing with. That is a little bit heightened. That is what I'm saying. Patients who had a drinking problem are drinking more. Patients who have depression are feeling more depressed because some of the coping skills that we have taught them, they're not able to implement anymore. Those social interactions which used to be helpful, attending the groups which they were going to. So those things, a lot of those activities, those social bond building activities which they were involved in, the face-to-face interaction with other clinicians, that is not possible. So that has partly contributed to it. But overall, I would expect more repercussions, possibly post-traumatic stress and those kinds of symptoms to come on. That's just a prediction, though. You have to wait and see.
Sailaja,
Yes.
Sailaja, is there something you'd like to add?
Yes, I'd like to say that, yes, there are, like Dr. Chandramouli was so eloquent about how there's a possibility that would increase. I just wanted to put in a pitch for the fact that there are some evidence-based techniques, therapy techniques, which are CBT, that is cognitive behavior therapy, where we do an exposure and response prevention program, and there are different other therapies like GBT and different mindful-based stress relief techniques that do help. So, like as Dr. Chandramouli said, sometimes the coping techniques people are losing, but by introducing these techniques, we do find a lot of success in, especially the exposure and response prevention program. It's really helpful in dealing with some of the anxiety disorders for several individuals. And nowadays, we are in this age of technology, and many of my younger clients use a lot of apps. There's so many different apps. There's an app called No CD app to help with people with anxiety disorders. There is an app for meditation, and I'm blanking on the name, but many of the young students who go to schools and colleges, they use that. And I'm very impressed. They stop and take a breath, and they stop and breathe. And it's like, wow, that is so nice. So there are coping techniques. The anxiety might increase, but please remember, it is each one of us has those coping techniques inside us. And if you're not able to do it yourself, if you're not able to use apps, please seek a therapist. Therapists sometimes, are like branded as, they're not going to help. Like people come to me, I went to 3 therapists and it didn't help. So did you have a intention to change? They would say no. So if you don't have an intention to change, the therapist can't help. But definitely those methods do assist people in getting closer to the coping techniques.
Okay, Dr. Raj, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay, I just want to say thank you to our amazing panel who are so knowledgeable and have been so generous with sharing all their information. It's been very informative. So thank you very much for taking the time on a Saturday evening to present to us. And I also want to participants for being here and participating. Thank you so much for also taking time on a Saturday evening. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Lalita, and my family.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.